Hello, review for Bob Shaw, Ground Zero Man. Most of my reviews are for books that I liked or I appreciate things about. This review is for a book that I actively disliked, was frustrated by. I really did not enjoy this book. I was angry with it a lot of the time. I was frustrated. I was annoyed. I came this close to DNFing it. I walked into this library room. I went to put it on the shelf. I thought I might come back to it one day, and I went, no, I'm never coming back to this book. It was too unpleasant to read for me to ever want to come back to it. So if I wanted to review it fully, I knew I had to finish it, and it was hard. I managed to prevent myself from skim reading 90% of the time, but I kept wanting to skim read. And that definitely didn't work because while I dislike this book acutely, I can't for a second deny that Bob Shaw writes beautifully. The two things about this book that are good are the writing, which is very nice indeed, sometimes quite beautiful and lyrical, and the characterization, which Bob Shaw really has a talent for characterization, an undeniable talent. And there's a lot of characters in this book. Sometimes they appear for like 5 seconds, like the asthmatic child George. And it started to feel like the large number of characters that walk on and walk off, it's probably because there's not very much else good about this book, and Shaw was relying on characterization. Anyway, I went onto this book almost directly from Wreath of Stars by Shaw, which I really enjoyed, and I knew I was taking a risk. Going from one book that you really enjoy by an author straight onto another one. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. I feel that the disappointment and ennui that I got from this book would have been less if I'd read something else in between. My expectations wouldn't have been as high. But hey, this seemed to have a really intriguing plot line. I maintain that it's very well planned. Shaw knew what he was doing. He had a clear idea of events and steps, and he basically paced the story right. Once again, neutrinos features a central plot here, as well as in Wreath of Stars, so I guess really beautiful writing, and neutrinos are Shaw's go-to sci-fi base. Now, the first thing that I really didn't like about this book, that really annoyed me, that frustrated me acutely, starts with the cover. So if you look at this cover, I've got that Corgi science fiction edition, and you've got this rather 70s cover. I think this was copyright in 71, but it might have been first published in the mid-70s. So basically this is a 60s book, and it shows. Anyway, we've got this artwork, these strange symbols that I think are meant to represent higher levels maths. I don't know if they do or not. You've got this face, whatever. You've got a mushroom cloud of a nuclear destruction in the background. And we've got more. We've got stunning SF from award-winning author. We've got Ground Zero Man. And I think that between these different features, I was not unreasonable in expecting science fiction. Maybe even quite a bit of science fiction from this book. And I would argue that there's almost none. Now, this is a discussion, sometimes bordering on argument, that I've had many times with many people over the years. For many years, I maintained that a book that was primarily literature, but had as a concept, a science fiction concept in there, couldn't rationally be described as science fiction, because it isn't. And Neville Shoots on the Beach was one of those for me. I always loved that book, but I argued it wasn't science fiction. It was just about some very ordinary 50s people drinking gin and doing a secretarial course and other things. And yes, the background was nuclear holocaust, but there was none of that really visible in the novel. Another one is Cold Comfort Farm, another book I absolutely adore, but no one thinks that's science fiction just because it's set in its era. Is that 50s? Maybe. At any case, there's a public telephone with a video screen so that people who can talk to each other can see each other as well. Technology that we just barely have now. They certainly didn't have it when Cold Comfort Farm was written. But no one goes around saying Cold Comfort Farm's a science fiction book, do they? No, it isn't. Bob Shaw, Ground Zero Man. Book starts with our protagonist, Hutchman. I think his name's Lucas. And he's sitting in a room and he's damaged as he's got his hand on a button. We get this distorted lens to suggest that the button and the end of the world are connected. And there's this big teaser, and then he says to us, oh, well, I suppose we have to go back a few weeks to show how we got here. But I'm tired and must be careful not to relax too much. I must be prepared to press the black button. So there's a lot of deception from the author to the reader right there. And when we start reading at chapter 1, we realise, of course, we're a few weeks back from Hutchman sitting there with his hand on the button. And when we go back, we find out Hutchman is this undistinguished mathematician. He's working for a company that he doesn't really like. He's a very good mathematician, but he's doing stuff below his average because his batshit crazy wife doesn't want to move and he can't do anything without her. One day when he's doing maths, he goes down a side road in his mind and figures out a way to make neutrinos into a self-propagating resonance that bounces off the moon and will virtually instantaneously detonate every nuclear bomb in the world. Very science fiction. I like where you're going here, Shaw. Now, I don't blame Shaw for not writing the maths. Maths is hard to write. It's very hard to write as science fiction. It's very hard to write as science fact in a way that's absorbable by your average reader. And I've read a few books with both types. Maths isn't my strongest point, and it doesn't always work. So I don't blame Shaw for not trying to go deep into the maths. None is given to us. It's just we're told. We're told that Hutchman is a mathematician and he's done this thing. And then he actually builds this device, but we don't see any of that. We get a few tantalizing bits of him buying cylinders of gas or buying something else, but we don't see him building the machine. We've never given any visual to it except that it has a black button. And it's pretty heavy. It's hard to transport. And that, in essence, is all the science fiction that you get in this novel. And I resent that. So out of 160 pages, you could probably fit all the science in this entire book onto these 2 pages and you'd be done with it. And all the rest of it is Hutchman and his wife. And I didn't like either of them. But aside from that, it's very, very 60s or 70s mainstream fiction. And I know that because as an omnivorous reader who read mostly from op shops for many years, second-hand books were on the sale shelf, I've read a lot of 60s and 70s mainstream fiction, which is what this reads like. The sociology and sexual dynamics of the time can be difficult, and in this book they're pretty horrible. So he's got a batshit crazy wife who's got money, which is sponsoring his lifestyle, even though he's working full-time for a military organization that creates missiles, but they're still living off her income. She is this crazy that over the years he's come to make sure that when he goes home his briefcase is on the passenger seat of his car, because if it isn't, she assumes he's given a woman a lift home and had sex with her. It's like everything in her nasty little brain twists around towards sex. But that doesn't make you that sympathetic for Hutchman, because he's stayed with her for all these years and he's had a kid with her and he still obviously really likes her, physically speaking. He calls her crazy on a regular basis, but never takes her to a doctor or a psychologist for help. Now, I get that it's the 60s and you didn't automatically seek help for the people who needed mental health addressed in the 60s or even the early 70s. But it's dated badly in that regard. Now, his wife, Vicky, does nothing and is nothing except this nasty irritant in his life. So having discovered this side effect that will detonate all the nuclear things in the world, Hutchman then goes ahead and builds the machine. Why does he build this machine? Essentially, I think, because he's annoyed with his wife, who thinks he's having he's dreaming about some woman that he saw on television, who he doesn't even remember her name. Now, I've read a few other people's reviews of this book. I had to do something to keep myself going. And several other people are of the opinion that he builds this device after nuclear devices detonated over Damascus, killing thousands of people. He obsesses over the small children that have been killed, the 7-year-olds who will never grow into 8-year-olds. And as a result of that, he builds this machine. It didn't read like that to me, I've got to say. But I found Hutchman and Vicky so irritating that I may have missed something. Maybe that's why he does it, but it's not spelled out. And to me, it felt like he was already in the process of building it in his own head long before the most recent early morning screaming effect of his wife or whatever it was. To me, it felt like he built this machine essentially because he was peeved with his wife. He built it in secret, and then, having built it, but no, let's stop right there, okay? 1971, this was copyrighted. It was finished in 1971. In 1971, there were somewhat under 50,000 nuclear weapons in the world. If all of those had detonated simultaneously, we would have looked at a nuclear winter that would address the worst of the science fiction dystopian scenarios. And there might well have been no life left at the end of it. There would have been minimal human life, and there would be no civilization. So, help me out here. He saw a bomb on television detonating over Damascus, killing millions, so he decides to detonate them all? I mean, no matter how crazy your wife is, this is not a good excuse for doing that. And I didn't enjoy that at all. I feel like Shaw may have been trying to promote a different attitude towards that, but didn't do it well enough for me. So he builds it. The pathologic jealousy of Vicky reaches new heights because now he's working late, and of course she's sure he's having an affair or several affairs or whatever. And all of this has no science fiction and not really a lot of speculative fiction. Again, other people's reviews see this building of the device as a way to stop war, and at one stage Shaw calls it the anti-bomb bomb. But no. If you're going to detonate thousands of I've already said it, right? I won't say it again. So there's that. Now what's the other thing that happens around about? Oh yes. Hutchman decides to build this device, detonate it on a given day and time, but first he's going to send a copy of his calculations to kind of every government on Earth. We don't go into detail here, but he definitely sends them to the Russians. Definitely sends them to at least one English agency. We're told how he calculates. He's going to send it to all the governments of the world. He calculates how long it's going to take to get to all these different places, because despite a few wobbly attempts of Shaw's to pretend we're in the future, this is the past. So he calculates how long the English mail system is going to take to send envelopes to, I don't know, Poland or Uzbekistan. Did Uzbekistan exist then? Maybe not. Poland and, I don't know, France. And again, it's like, why? You want to detonate this, build it, detonate it. I don't agree, but that's a plan. Why send letters to everyone on Earth calculating how long it'll take to get to Moscow, how long it'll take them to find a mathematician to understand it and check the dynamics and build their own machine, and then say, oh hey, on November the 30th I'm going to detonate this at 3:32 p.m. It's like, I don't understand what this is meant to be, and I wish you would stop it, Shaw. Whatever it is, just stop it. He doesn't. It keeps going. Now at the last minute he decides that rather than mailing it to Moscow, it's better to give it to an old flame from his university days who's about to go there on a conference. So he gives it to her, tries to have sex with her because this book is a very raw, untracked mind book. Doesn't succeed because Vicky has emasculated him. It's like, pass the bucket on that one. Again, sexual dynamics, themes from the 60s can be done well or they can be done badly. Badly on this occasion. So he gives her this envelope. She predictably opens it. Turns out that the other mania of the 60s and 70s has now had its red button pressed. So in Australia, World War II, 60s and 70s, Australians were ridiculously paranoid. They were crazy stupid about communism. Communism was the great evil. It was going to destroy all of mankind. Whatever. During wars and other events, people who were communists were actually arrested and incarcerated just for being communists, which seems ridiculous in 2024, but was very much the social flavour of the day. So this old flame that he's going to give this envelope to turns out to be a socialist. And again, Australia got its paranoia from Great Britain, right? Socialism, communism are actually two different things, but no one really seemed to understand that. So she's a socialist, and she gives it to her communist buddy, and she calls Hutchman over, and he goes over late at night, further convincing his batshit crazy wife that he's having an affair. When he gets there, he finds that Old Flame's mate who's there's got one of those sickle and moon pendants, ornaments, badges, whatever, confirming him as a member of the Communist Party. Bad things happen. Guy falls out a window. Hutchman's complicit in the murder. We then get the most stereotypical English detective inspector you can imagine. He's on Lucas Hutchman. He's on Hutchman's Hutchman is on his radar because he's sure that Hutchman is lying to him, which he is, but he isn't lying to him about any of the things that police inspector stereotype thinks he's lying about. Hutchman ends up in prison, then he goes on the run, and here he is on the run, and his main concern is to mail all these envelopes on his right schedule so that they'll get all the way around the world. And this seems to be Shaw's cue to do a short road trip of England, identifying different factors and people and showing us England. And it's well written, and some of the characters are great, and it was pointless in scenario of the story. So by now what I'm reading seems much more like a 60s or 70s attempt at a thriller, and it is not a good thriller. It is a bad thriller. Hutchman is incapable of making a sensible decision. He buys spray paints and spray paints his car so it won't look blue anymore. He decides it's too risky to go to a hotel, so he goes to a bread and breakfast, a small family-run bread and breakfast with a horrible landlord and a prying landlady who aren't going to remember him any better than the hotel. Apparently not. So it's just basically all of this center part, and that's most of this book, is random mainstream. I'm sorry, it's drivel. It's just drivel. And I didn't like it. I did not like it at all. Most people seem to love it. And I'm not saying that they're wrong, because the writing, as I've mentioned, is beautiful. Shaw writes beautifully. His characterization is good. But this doesn't feel like a science fiction book to me. I get that this whole nuclear, it was written in the nuclear era when people were trying to raise awareness or make you think about things. I feel that it fails. I feel that it fails significantly. And then it ended. So I haven't bothered about spoilers so far. I don't think that book has enough respect for me to deserve not spoiling. Goodreads has 13 reviews and it's only been shelved about 200 times, so I don't think that this book is ever going to make a huge comeback. Except for people who really love Shaw in this way that I really love Roger Zelazny, and his writing will carry them through. So at the end, there's an end. And that's pretty much it. You have Hutchman goes to detonate the device on that precise second when he told the whole world he was going to, for reasons that still mystify me. Was he trying to get, he may have been trying to get them to all dismantle their bombs, but that makes no sense because there's a lot of bombs that you wouldn't be able to denature that fast, and he detonates, none of them work, he's done with that, they rebuild. None of this holds together, none of it makes sense. Anyway, he does his thing, and he comes to this house where he's got his machine. His wife's there because she's batshit crazy and she's been told he's got a love nest there or something. I don't really care. I don't like Vicky. When a CIA man or a Russian man or whatever other one gave her a karate chop to the neck, I was celebrating. Unfortunately, she survived, but you know, whatever. And Shaw has given us a bit of a plot twist in that he doesn't have to hit the button. It's a dead man's button, so he's already pressed it. Anyone who shoots him, it's going to go off. I don't know about you. Page 2, I'd already foreseen that, because if you're doing something that big, a dead man's button's been around for a long time, right? That didn't make any sense that it wouldn't be. He's been shot by, I think, the Russians who set out a sleeper spy to kill him, who didn't succeed. It's like, oh. It really tries very hard to be a thriller. And a lot of the 70s thrillers have thankfully sunk into obscurity. This one should as well. Both as a science fiction, which it marginally is, and as a thriller, which it really isn't. It's about as thrilling as cold mashed potatoes with no butter or salt. The writing is still beautiful. I'd be grateful if you would, Cliff, Hutchman, choking on a tide of warm thankfulness, had difficulty getting the words out in a normal tone. When he set the phone down, he experienced a heady moment of certitude. He left his office and hurried upstairs to the purchasing department, where he spent more than 2 hours making notes in the catalogue library and checking on the availability of major items. In the afternoon, he got confirmation from Taylor that the Jeevons Institute laboratory was available. And that's about all the STEM science you get in the building of the machine. That's it. That's it. Mentioned that I didn't like the thriller. What else haven't I mentioned? The ending. Oh, yes. The ending was just so blah. I do remember it. By tomorrow, I hope to have forgotten it. By next week, I hope to have forgotten everything about this book except a lingering memory of not enjoying it. And with my bad memory, there's an excellent chance that I will achieve this goal. I didn't care about Vicky or Hutchman. I despised their culture. The small attempts Shaw made threw in there to make it feel science fiction, like at one stage Hutchman is listening to the radio. It talks about the orbiting manned station. That isn't enough to make this science fiction. In every other regard, this was as white picket fence, mainstream, milk and water, English culture as you can imagine. And if Shaw had chosen to write that book, I wouldn't have objected. But in terms of a thriller, he didn't have the mindset to make it thrilling, and he didn't have the mindset for the things that a person on the run might think. Our main character, Hutchman, I may not like him, but he wasn't so stupid to go to a bed and breakfast when he's trying to hide out and just sit there in the room making the landlady curious. So yes, the sociology is bad, the thriller is weak, the sexual dynamics are cringe, and I am not really that nice. I'm not really that sensitive when it comes to poor sexual dynamics. I have read almost all of Heinlein, and I've enjoyed most of it. I've even read Time Enough for Love more than once, and I didn't hate it. You can't really do anything more than that to prove that you're not oversensitive about sexual dynamics. But in here, it is terrible. Vicky and her husband are hideous. The society that embraces that sort of relationship was hideous. I'm glad it's gone. And Bob Shaw's attitude toward it was a little bit worrisome. I've got to tell you that. So, this is not stunning SF. It is an award-winning author. Corgy's science fiction should have stuck to books that actually had science fiction, because sticking a nuclear mushroom on the cover is insufficient to make it science fiction. Ground Zero Man relates to nothing because no explosions happen, no nuclear... oh yes, this is the ending. No explosions happen, no nuclear devices are in any way disabled. Mathematics are devised to go around his stupid little spoilers. There's stupid little side effect, as you'd expect from someone who doesn't know what he's doing enough to paint his own car. So, Ground Zero Man by Bob Shaw. Bob Shaw is an amazing author. I wish he'd never written this book, or I wish I'd never read it. That won't stop me from reading Bob Shaw in the future, but it'll take me a while before I'll recover from this one. In the meantime, I think I can thank Bob Shaw for an oncoming reading slump. I am just so put off by this book, I don't know how I can choose another one. I'm wincing away at every single one of those science fiction books sitting on the shelf, juicy and waiting for me. I just can't bring myself to look at them. Fantasy would be worse. I'm hoping that in a day or two I can convince myself to go for maybe an Arthur C. Clarke, where there's usually at least some pretense at science. Serious reading slump. This might be the last book review for a while, I'm afraid. Blame Bob Shaw, not me. Anyway, thank you for listening to me rant and rave. If this is your favourite book, I'm not saying you're wrong. I really, really hated it. I really, really resent the seconds of my life that I spent reading this travesty, and in the future, I will try to read better books. You too should read good books. Thanks for watching.